Sort of just to recap for anybody that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before on one of these sessions, I'm Katie Vi, one of the directors of Better with Money, and we're always thrilled to be able to deliver these financial education workshops on behalf of the ICE, Ben Fund and the support network. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. Now, after what may seem very long years of restrictions, foreign travel has opened up again, and I'm sure you, same as me, are chomping at the bit to be able to head overseas for a holiday this year. So whether your idea of a summer break is kind of hiking in the Alps or the sun, sea and sand of the Mediterranean, sort of going abroad on holiday is a really exciting prospect, which many of us are looking forward to in the coming months. So when it comes to holidays and travels, we tend to know what we can afford when we begin to plan the summer trip, but all too often it's those extras that we haven't initially considered, plus unforeseen costs that we incur kind of whilst we're enjoying ourselves, that can really blow a hole in our budgets. And it means that we can still be paying for our holiday long after even our suntan has faded. So the purpose of today's session is very much to just kind of arm you with some top tips when planning your travel, and hopefully provide you with some useful checklists around some areas to just complement your thinking and ensure that you've kind of got all the essentials covered. So for the next half an hour, we're going to be looking at that all-important travel money. We're going to spend some time looking at the considerations of when spending overseas. We're going to have a look at the importance of travel insurance. Sadly, should the unforeseen happen or our expectations are not met, we're going to spend some time looking at claiming sort of refunds and compensation. And then we're going to finish with the opportunity for any questions that you may have. And as Sarah mentioned, please do feel free to use that question box or that chat facility to be sort of sending through any of your questions that you have, but also if you have any useful hints and tips yourselves, because sometimes I find on these sessions that you'll also have your own little nuggets of information or something that you've recently done that's maybe saved you lots of money, and it's fantastic for us to be able to share that with sort of your peers that have joined this session as well. So when we're thinking about holidays, and certainly for me, some of my earliest memories actually revolve around the excitement of being handed this kind of new, exciting, funny money, as me and my brother used to call it. And there would obviously be the spending money for the duration of the trip. But it is safe to say that physical currency is still a really popular payment method. But we also now have access to other payment methods that give us a greater level of protection. So it's a useful starting point for us to just run through the advantages and disadvantages of each payment method that you may want to explore prior to traveling. Now, according to a YouGov survey, visiting the local travel agent or post office on the high street to buy spending money is still the most popular choice for consumers, but these are often not the most cost-effective way. It's safe to say we also spend time, and sometimes a lot of time, looking for the best deals on holidays and flights. So really, we need to apply the same principles when it comes to purchasing foreign currency as well. It is ultimately a commodity, which often comes with poor exchange rates and can have very high kind of transaction fees as well. Now, just as a reminder, a currency's exchange rate is typically determined by the strength or weakness of an underlying economy. And unfortunately, we have got kind of little to no control over that. But what we do have control over is buying currency before we travel to make sure that we've already fixed the exchange rate and we're comfortable with what we've actually got to spend in that local currency. Now, physical currency also helps control our spending by enabling us to stick to the budget that you've got. But it can also be highly advantageous in situations where cards are not accepted, or if you're planning on visiting kind of local markets or souks where haggling is the norm. And in this circumstance, certainly cash provides the most powerful opportunities in these types of situations. Also, tipping is customary in many countries overseas due to the poor salaries that are given in hospitality. So having kind of local currency for this purpose is advisable as well. Now, one of the most expensive ways of buying currency is at the airport. And simply because they know that they've become a last resort option, so the exchange rates are notoriously very poor. Now, the bottom half of the slide sort of runs through some of the disadvantages to currency. And one of the biggest areas really is from a protection angle. So exchange bureaus are not authorised by the Financial Conduct Authority. So leaving kind of large amounts of currencies with them until you go to collect them could be risky. And also any purchases that are made with cash are not covered by the Section 75 protection agreement of the Credit Consumer Act. Now, before sort of shopping around in order to secure the best exchange rate, it is worth sort of looking as well at the wealth of comparison tools that sit online to help you. There are many of them, but I've just detailed at the bottom of the slide just a handy comparison tool that actually sits on the money saving expert website. But like I said, there are many that you can take advantage of as well. So moving on to prepaid travel cards. Now, these are becoming increasingly unpopular, particularly with parents who want to provide their children with spending money, but they want to avoid the risks involved in them sort of carrying around large amounts of cash. Prepaid travel cards are easy to use. They tend to be Visa or MasterCard based products, so they're widely accepted across the world. They tend to offer better exchange rates than what you would get from a standard debit or credit card. And also they're a far more secure payment method than cash, simply because if the card was lost, it's not linked to your main bank account, but also an instant block can be placed on the card. Now, there are three types of prepaid travel cards. You've got single currency prepaid cards. So these are restricted to one type of currency, such as euros or US dollars. You can lock in the exchange rate on the day that you load on the cash, which can actually work sort of in your favour if rates were to fall kind of later down the line. But also you'll know exactly how much you have to spend in the local currency. The second version is a multiple currency prepaid card. So that actually allows you to load several currencies just onto the one card. So that's ideal if you're planning on visiting multiple destinations. So for example, you could have £100 in sterling, £200 of dollars, 300 in euros, all stored on that one card, but in different wallets. And you can also lock in rates by converting when you load the cash, or you can store some money in pounds to then convert later, whatever works best for you. Now, the third type of prepaid travel card that's available is the sterling prepaid card. And that offers the most flexibility because you can load your card with pounds, you can spend in dozens of different currencies, and each time you spend or withdraw cash, the pound is converted to the required currency at the exchange rate on that day. So it makes it sort of a much more flexible opportunity. However, it can be quite hard to budget how much money you'll actually have available in any given kind of destination. Now, despite prepaid travel cards being either a Visa or MasterCard product, they still don't offer Sanction 75 protection on purchases for goods and services made on the card. And also balances are perceived as an electronic payment. So therefore, they're actually not protected by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. So it isn't advisable to keep kind of sizable balances hanging around on there purely because of the risk. If that institution holding that money was to go bust, then sadly there is no compensation scheme protection in place. And it's really important to review the fees against these types of cards because they can actually vary quite dramatically. And there can be kind of application and replacement fees, in addition to kind of transaction fees or even inactivity charges as well. So it's also about trying to avoid using the prepaid card to buy currency with, because it's actually treated as a cash withdrawal. So it could lead to other fees being imposed as well. And it's also worth noting that they're not an accepted payment method for car hire, because they're not actually a credit card. So you could come unstuck if you didn't have a credit card with you whilst overseas as well, if you were looking to hire a car in particular. Another issue to just be aware of is that usually the withdrawal limits can be quite low. So it doesn't really provide an option to borrow large amounts of money in the event of an emergency situation. Now, if you're interested in prepaid travel cards, then again, shop around to ensure that you're securing the best fees that are available. And again, you may find the comparison tool useful that sits on the IMechE website, which I've just detailed here at the bottom of the slide. Now, moving on to the last overseas payment method, and that's specialist travel debit cards and credit cards. Now, these are one of the cheapest ways to spend because they give near perfect exchange rates, but without the additional non-sterling transaction fees and all the other hidden fees that are imposed when using just a standard debit card or a standard credit card abroad. So you want to try and avoid using those two types of cards if possible. The majority of standard debit cards will actually charge 50p up to £1.50 for every purchase made, in addition to the kind of normal exchange rate charge. So it can end up being very, very expensive to be just using your standard debit card for overseas spending. Now, there can be exceptions for payments that are made in euros, that are made within the European Economic Area. But the key benefits to a travel debit card is that it is linked to a bank account, but it functions as an ATM card. So it's easy for you to withdraw cash quickly if you need it, but also you mitigate those fees that would have otherwise been in place by just using that standard bank debit card instead. Now, it's also important to note that money held on deposit with a bank or a building society through a regulated financial conduct authority institution is protected under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. So you don't have any concerns there if large balances are being maintained in that account, but also should the card get lost or stolen, a block can obviously be placed on it immediately, and then you can arrange for kind of a replacement card to be issued. Now, the added benefit that comes with a travel credit card is that all purchases made over £100 up to 30,000 are covered by the Section 75 of the Credit Consumer Act. Now, it's also usually the only accepted payment method, or at least damage deposit, for car rental agreements. And it can also act as a real safety net in times of emergency. Now, just on emergencies and just a little bit of anecdotal sort of little story and feedback, my in-laws were actually abroad in 2010 when the Icelandic ash cloud caused all sorts of travel disruption, which you may remember, and they didn't have a credit card of any variety. So it was actually really quite challenging for them to be able to sort extra money for accommodation and food to kind of tie them over until they could get back home. Now, needless to say, whenever they travel now, they make sure they do have a travel credit card with them, purely just in case of emergencies or in case they needed a quick kind of alternative means of payment. So sadly, we like to think that these unforeseen won't happen, but sometimes the reality is they do, and it can really catch us off guard if we don't have a sort of diverse range of payment methods to hand. It's important to also note that any application for a travel debit card and credit card will perform a credit check. So it is something to be mindful of, and especially with credit cards, do avoid using them to withdraw cash, as not only will you kind of incur high fees for doing it, but you can also notice that it will be registered on your credit file, which is not favourably perceived by lenders. They don't like seeing that. And so if for somebody who is perhaps going to be going through a mortgage application or quite a large borrowing process, it wouldn't look favourable to have sort of cash withdrawals against credit cards registering, simply because it is treated as a normal cash withdrawal. So it can be quite heavily penalised on fees, but also, like I said, it can be reflected in the credit scoring and the credit report as well. Now, with regards to sort of spending overseas, and we've already covered, some of these that are on the slide when exploring the different forms of travel money, but some of the key considerations again exist around protection, and it's the protection that comes with the Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act, and essentially it's free credit card purchase protection for any of those goods or services that are over £100 up to 30,000. And not many people know that actually that exists, and wonder why sometimes there is such a push to make sure that we are maybe buying sort of expensive goods on a credit card, and it is for this reason. So if, for example, a airline was to go bust when you're on holiday, you needed to book new return flights to get home, then it's those sorts of costs that would be covered through the Section 75, obviously providing you've paid for that on the credit card. Now, Section 75 doesn't apply for payments made using a prepaid card or a debit card. However, they do have a different form of protection that's called chargeback. And chargeback basically allows the card provider to reverse the payment that you've made, as long as the card provider upholds, the kind of issue that you've raised or the complaint that you're making. Now, there's no minimum or maximum purchase amounts that are in place for a chargeback, but a claim needs to be made within 120 days from when you first notice a kind of problem or the dispute has occurred. Now, another tip with regards to spending on cards abroad is that it is usually advisable to select to pay in the local currency, as by doing that, you kind of get the Visa or the MasterCard currency conversion rate. If you opt to pay in sterling, it's then left up to the foreign bank or the shop or restaurants bank to make the calculation, and that's known as dynamic currency conversion, but it tends to be less favourable. So again, there are sometimes some exceptions, but the general rule is when you pay by card and you get the option to select sterling or the local currency, go for the local currency. It will give you the better exchange rate, and it can be the lesser on fees as well for that exchange. Now, the idea of a holiday is quite simply for us to have some time away to relax and unwind, but it's fair to say that travel can soon become a stress-filled nightmare if things don't go to plan. Now, the ABI statistics showed that in 2019, over 8.5 million of us British people travelled overseas without insurance. And out of the £377 million of claims that are paid out by the travel insurers in 2019, a staggering 197 million were for medical expenses. So it is really important to ensure that you are adequately insured before you travel overseas. And over the next few slides, I'm going to run through some of the key considerations for you. It probably goes without saying that I didn't look at any kind of COVID related data, because as we know, a lot of travel either didn't happen, so the statistics almost become irrelevant. So in case you are wondering why it's sort of 2019 that's featuring here, because sadly that was kind of the last year that we had a very, very active travel in order to get some good statistics and look at some trends of our travelling behaviour, so to speak. So given the thousands of pounds that we typically have to pay for a holiday, An additional, what could be as little as £30 to then protect all that hard-earned cash, and what could be a trip of a lifetime, really is insignificant. Yet being uninsured and potentially facing thousands of pounds worth of overseas medical costs could be life-changing. And there are plenty of stories, horror stories, where people haven't had travel insurance and they have ended up with hundreds of thousands of medical costs that they are totally liable for. It's important to not leave purchasing travel insurance until the last minute, because it not only protects you for when you're away, but it also covers you for cancellations. And when looking for travel insurance, there are some key questions to sort of ask yourself and to explore and dig deeper on. And I've listed these on the slide here. And hopefully they'll just act as a useful reference point for you to look back on. Now, be clear on what the policy is actually going to cover you for, and also the claim limits in place. So if you were looking to go skiing, for example, a standard travel policy wouldn't be enough. So you would need a winter sports cover, either as a separate policy or as a bolt-on to an existing policy. The duration and volume of travel is really important as well, because if you were planning on traveling abroad maybe several times in the year, it would actually work out cheaper to take out an annual policy rather than just a single. And like all insurance policies, there are incidents that insurers won't pay out for. They include things like kind of dangerous activities or travel to prohibited or dangerous countries, alcohol related injuries. So just be mindful of what activities you plan on engaging with, and just ensure that, you know, where possible, you have got the right level of protection and cover in place as well, or perhaps before you agree to take part in a dangerous activity while you're over there. Now, another really important area is to ensure that all pre-existing medical conditions are disclosed on application as well. One of the biggest reasons that insurances in general don't pay out is because it comes to light that there has been non-disclosure of key pieces of information. And I cannot stress this enough, as somebody who's worked in financial services now for 19 years, they will always find out, always. So whether you're asked whether you're a smoker, whether you're asked around pre-existing medical conditions, they have means and ways of always finding out that information. So be upfront, be honest, and that way it makes sure you're paying the right level of premium for the right level of cover, and therefore you've got total peace of mind that you've got the right protection in place that will fully cover you in the event of an unforeseen circumstance while you're away. It's absolutely pointless paying out for an insurance for X amount and then not disclosing a really key piece of information which could make it null and void immediately. Now, one tip to note is the ages of who you're going to be traveling with. So it's usually cost effective to take out a group policy, but if one of the traveling party is age 65 or over, then it's actually cheaper for them to take out a separate policy, purely because premiums for a group insurance are rated and increased for those who carry the greatest risk. So it could be that by just arranging separate cover for somebody who's older would actually work far cheaper than staying in the group policy. And as the saying goes, again, shopping around is key, because you will see differences between the different policies, levels of cover and premium that are being offered. Also, it's well worth checking whether you already have travel insurance as part of your bank account, purely because many of these package bank accounts that you pay a fee for every month do provide you with quite a comprehensive annual travel insurance policy. So have a look at that, because it may well save you some money if you've already got it in place. Now, when shopping around and comparing cover levels, it can be clear to see why premiums are cheaper with a certain policy, purely because it may not provide you with the right level of protection for what you actually need. So I've listed the key areas here on this slide that you may want to ensure that your policy covers you for. Now, with regards to cancellations, most policies now cover coronavirus medically, but it's typical not to be covered for cancellation if entry restrictions at your destination mean that you can't go on your trip. Also, you won't be covered at all if you travel to a country against the advice of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Now, policies and travel guidance and rights are changing all the time at the moment, so it is really important to keep checking this before you go. And I've also detailed at the bottom of the slide some useful websites for anybody with specific or kind of challenging circumstances that may find it difficult to get that insurance in place. I think because our sort of the way in which we're living now is starting to show signs that it's going back to normal. So sometimes we think that kind of the coronavirus is no longer applicable with regards to travel, but that isn't the case in many countries. As numbers spike, they may impose localized travel restrictions again. So it really is a moving landscape. It's very important to keep checking that. And we spent some time kind of exploring key considerations before taking out travel insurance, and then the importance of those key features that we want to ensure that it protects us against. So this slide really just acts as a useful sort of travel insurance checklist. It's really important just to draw out here that applying for a UK global health insurance card is really important. And these have now replaced the European health insurance card, obviously post-Brexit. They are free to apply for. It lets you get state healthcare in Europe at a reduced cost, or sometimes even free of charge. If you have still got a European health insurance card, they're still valid until its expiry date. But once they've expired, you would then need to apply for the global health insurance card, which has now superseded it. And just to kind of stress, the global health insurance card absolutely is not a replacement for travel insurance. That still should absolutely be in place to cover any medical needs or requirements that you could end up having whilst overseas. Now, in the unfortunate event that something goes wrong, or you have cause to complain or sort of seek a refund or compensation, there are a few areas to be aware of. It goes without saying, and it seems very obvious to say, but the more organised we can be in booking accommodation and obviously getting the right levels of travel insurance in place, the better. Many hotel rooms can be booked on a refundable basis. Many trips can be booked in advance with a certain number of timescale on cancellation rights as well. So if family circumstances were to change, it means that you're not going to kind of incur a loss of money. Consider obviously paying for large cost items via a credit card in order to benefit from that Section 75 protection, purely because Section 75 is actually written under law, whereas chargeback through kind of debit cards or prepaid cards is just the card provider's policy. So it's not actually set in law, and it can be quite easily rejected. Not many people realise either that travel delays of 3 hours or more are entitled to compensation. But in all circumstances, your first port of call is to see whether there's a kind of viable claim through your travel insurance. That's what it's there for. Failing that, it's about sort of raising the dispute or dissatisfaction with the provider of your goods or services to see whether they can resolve it quickly for you, or if they can offer some form of redress. And then, of course, it goes without saying that if you're really not getting anywhere with either of those angles, then it is about taking it down a more formal legal route, either through a regulatory body that perhaps they are registered to and authorised by or a member of. And the same goes actually for holidays. It's becoming increasingly popular now for people to book their own travel and cut out the kind of travel agent, but just be very, very careful around the protection levels on doing that, because at least by going through an ABTA approved member, should something happen with that holiday, they are obviously a member of the ABTA committee, so therefore you would get support in resolving that dispute. If you've kind of booked travel off your own back, then it can be a far more lengthy process to get back the money and help that perhaps you're entitled to. Now, lastly, I've put up the details of the ICE BEM Fund and the support network who have sponsored the webinar today. Sadly, they're not there to fund your holiday, but they very much are providing invaluable financial, workplace and wellbeing support to you and your families. So I just wanted to make sure that you've got their website and helpline numbers there, should you need to seek more in that wider kind of context. And I'm very conscious of time, and I appreciate that with these sort of bite-sized sessions, we've whistled through an awful lot of information in a very short space of time, but I just wanted to ensure you've had the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. So Sarah, if I hand back over to you for any questions that have come through.
That's great, thank you very much. So firstly, where do you get the global health insurance card?
So you can actually apply for that online. So you can go, so that's basically, it's sort of through the government and the NHS. So you just go online in order to complete that. Very straightforward process. I say it's free of charge, and then you'll get that card through.
Lovely, that's great. And the next question, is it better to get all of my currency changed at once, or should I do it a bit at a time in case the rates improve?
Yeah, so it's always, I mean, the risk that comes with currency is obviously around the exchange rate that isn't fixed, and obviously we've got no control over. The problem we can have is if we haven't already changed up sort of the total amount that we're going to need, it then leads us to a situation where perhaps we need to use our remaining cash at something like a bureau de change. And the problem is, like we said before, they're notorious for not really having the best exchange rates because they know they are a little bit of a last resort option. But also that regulation piece about not being authorised by the Financial Services Authority can be a concern as well. But certainly for anybody who wants to kind of play the game around maximising exchange rates, you may prefer to not do it all in one hit. But I guess really the best way to approach spending money is just not to travel anyway with any one source of payment. And for some of the reasons we've already gone through, it's about making sure that you have got that travel credit card for emergencies or for any large purchases, so that you've got that protection, and also being able to make payments on there that would benefit from sort of real-time exchange rates as well.
That's great, thank you. And we've got time for one more. Someone has mentioned that they recently went abroad and found that Starling Bank doesn't charge for card payments and cash withdrawals. They use the current exchange rates. Are there any other cards that you know of like this?
Not off the top of my head, no. I would advise to have a look at the comparison tools. So the comparison tools that are listed on the various slides, they've got up-to-date information all the time. So Money Saving Expert, Which.com, they're really good sort of port of call to be able to have a look at what the different banks are offering, how the fees work, because also there are kind of challenger banks that are coming along all the time that are very much app orientated, fintech environments that are looking to kind of reduce a lot of those fees or make them non-existent, as the case is with Starling. So yeah, but it would be a case of looking at the comparison tools and making sure that you're sort of comfortable with what's out there. It is again, it's a moving landscape really.